Tonight, I want to show you a Blitz game between Alexei Shirov and Viswanathan Anand from 2016, and it is a strange one. Two pieces get offered up on the very same square, and by the end, the attacker is the one with nothing left to attack with. It comes from the 5th Zurich Chess Challenge Blitz, and the opening is the Semi-Slav defense. Let's begin. We open with d4, a claim on the middle, and Anand replies knight to f6. The pawn steps out to c4, black answers e6, and after knight to f3 comes d5, an equal share of the center. Knight to c3 joins in, black props the center up with c6, the Semi-Slav, white adds the modest e3, and knight to d7 completes black's little wall. Now the queen slides to c2, taking the diagonal that runs all the way to h7, and bishop to d6 answers, pointing back the other way. White prepares the long diagonal with b3, Anand castles kingside and tucks the king away, the bishop takes up its post on b2, and black stakes out the center with e5. So why not simply grab that pawn with the knight? Instead, white prefers h3, a quiet little loosening, and suddenly it is black who is the more comfortable side here. The pawn drives on with e4, poking the knight on f3, which only has the g2 pawn behind it. The knight goes sideways to h4, out on the edge, and black is clearly better. Rook to e8 loads up the central file. White's answer is on the wing, g4. Black steadies things with h6. Rook to g1 backs the pawn storm, knight to f8 comes home to help defend, white castles queenside, so the kings now sit on opposite wings. Anand starts his own march with a6, and f4 tries to make the wave roll. But the pawn on e4 answers by taking on passant on f3. Knight takes f3 recaptures, and now the rook comes crashing through with rook takes e3, glaring at both knights at once, the one on c3 and the one on f3 that nobody is guarding. So how do you save two knights in one move? You don't. Knight to e5 hands one of them over, blocking the file and buying activity with material, the first offer on that square. And instead of resolving anything, bishop to e6 just develops, which lets the tension level the game out. The knight on e5 still standing there, attacked twice, propped up only by the d4 pawn. Queen to d2 arrives, and now it is the rook on e3 that has questions to answer. Rather than shuffle the rook away, Anand plays rook takes e5, giving the material straight back. That is the second time a piece has been offered on that square. Pawn takes e5 accepts, and the humble pawn is suddenly forking two black pieces, the bishop on d6 and the knight on f6. Bishop takes e5 settles that at once. So which pawn should white be taking? Snapping off d5 kept the balance. Instead, bishop to d3 dreams of h7, and black is clearly better again. The pawn runs on to d4, prodding the knight on c3. That knight steps back to e2, c5 props the wedge up from behind, and white lunges with g5 at the f6 knight. Pawn takes g5 opens the gate. Queen takes g5 renews the whole idea. The g7 pawn is now tied to its own king, and the queen leers at the bishop on e5 and the knight on f6 together. Knight to d7 slips out of that double attack. And here comes queen to h5, still dreaming about g7. The rook on g1 is doing the pinning now, but this queen trip is a step in the wrong direction. So what should white have done instead? Let me show you the patient version. h4, simply feeding the g-pawn and keeping the wedge together. If black snaps it off with queen takes g5, check, then pawn takes g5 recaptures, and white's structure is far healthier than what he actually gets, but that is not what happened. The queen went hunting on h5, Anand starts counting on the other flank with b5. Rook to f1 lines up against f7, and pawn takes c4 rips at white's king while leaving the bishop on d3 hanging. Let's stop here because this is the fork in the road. Look at the two attacks. White's is the loud one, a rook on g1 nailing the g7 pawn to its king, a queen on h5, a rook staring down at f7. Black's is the quiet one, a pawn sitting on c4, touching a bishop that has no defender, and open lines pointing at white's king on c1. Black is the better side here, with an extra pawn to lean on. So what would you play? The clean human choice is to recapture and keep the bishop alive, because the attack is the only thing white has left. Ask yourself what happens if he leaves that bishop where it stands. Shirov leaves it. Knight to f4 keeps the attackers pointing at the king, defending the bishop with the knight, and this is where the game is thrown away. Black is now completely winning. The move was simply pawn takes c4, taking the pawn back, keeping the bishop, and keeping the attack alive with a position that is only unpleasant rather than lost. That is not what happened, though. The knight went to f4. Sit with this for a moment. That g7 pawn has been pinned to its king for a while now, and it is still pinned. But a pin is only frightening if you can bring more attackers to the square, and white has run out of them. Meanwhile, the bishop on d3 is propped up by a single knight. The pawn on h3 will never be defended again, and black has extra material with a king that has plenty of shelter left. Anand takes the bishop with pawn takes d3, and it is decisive, although there was an even cleaner order available first. So what was the sharper move? Bishop takes f4 with check, dragging white's defender away before collecting anything. White answers rook takes f4, and only then does pawn takes d3 come, with the same extra material and no counterplay left at all. Still, both roads lead the same way. Shirov keeps swinging. Knight takes e6, removes the bishop, and touches the queen on d8, and the knight on f8 at the same time, with the rook on f1 pressing f7 behind it. Pawn takes e6 answers, and white is completely lost. There is one more shout, queen to f7, check, hitting both black knights on the way. There is nothing to block with and nothing to capture, so the king has to step. It goes to h8, calmly, and that is that. White resigned here, and the reason is simple. He is down material, his bishop is gone. The checks have run dry, and the black king on h8 is perfectly safe behind the very pawn white spent the whole game staring at. That pawn on g7 was pinned for a dozen moves, and it never moved a single square. It never had to, because white could never bring a third attacker to it. Two pieces offered on e5 to keep the attack breathing, and the attack still ran out of air. So the idea worth taking away, an attack is only as real as the number of attackers you can add to it, and when you cannot add another one, take the material back while you still can. Thanks for watching Nocturne Chess. If you enjoyed this game, subscribe for more quiet journeys through chess history. Until the next board, good night.